It's kind of like if the movies Willy Wonka and The Matrix had a baby, and that movie baby grew up consuming only pop culture from the 80s and a little bit of the 90s. That's right, today we're going to be watching the 2018 action-adventure movie Ready Player One. This movie is directed by Steven Spielberg and written by Penn and Ernest Cline, based on the novel by Ernest Cline, and it stars Sheridan as Percival/Wade and Olivia Cooke as Artemis/Samantha. So this review is going to be an in-depth review and analysis. I'm going to go through every category of my grid, talk about what works and what doesn't within this movie. Because it is in-depth, it is going to contain lots of spoilers. So now that that's out of the way, the first category of my grid is going to be writing, plot, and genre. So as far as the plot structure for Ready Player One goes, it was pretty much exactly what you would expect for this type of movie. You know, definitely has that feel of like an 80s adventure movie, and doesn't really do anything new or exciting within either the plot structure or the genre conventions. It's a nostalgia factory film, so it's not trying to do anything particularly new within the genre. It felt very much so like it was trying to, you know, obviously appeal to the people who grew up with these 80s and 90s movies that it was referencing, and in a lot of ways, particularly in the Shining sequence of scenes, you know, almost felt like an R-rated movie. Like, it really didn't hold back with, I mean, they had the freaking blood in the elevator scene, like that's pretty gory. You know, they really didn't hold back too much within those scenes. So, you know, it definitely was in a lot of ways a harder PG-13 movies than we see often these days. But then in a lot of other ways, particularly within the genre tropes, it really just, you know, fell into the really softer side of PG-13, particularly at the end when you have the kind of trope or archetype of, you know, Ogden Morrow ending up being the archivist who is helping our hero all along. It just felt really cheesy and just really been there, done that, and almost reminded me more of like a, you know, an episode of 30 Rock or Community that makes fun of these tropes. So it really, like, in a lot of ways, it felt very PG-13, watered down, family friendly, and in a lot of other ways felt almost like an R movie. I think they got away with it, partly because they really didn't show any blood aside from the elevator scene, and then, you know, there's not really any sexuality other than hints here and there, you know, nothing super overt. So it was able to get away with the PG-13 rating in that way, and I think as far as a, you know, homage to the 80s and 90s, it was able to get away with it because there wasn't a PG-13 rating when the movies that it's referencing was made. So a lot of those movies have that same kind of vibe of like, is this a family movie or is this something else? You know, something more mature. But it felt a little jumbled to me. Didn't quite know the intended audience and didn't quite know what kind of movie it was gonna be. I just felt like it could have done a little bit better to be a little bit more grounded and a little bit more focused. I also thought that the exposition was handled pretty clunkily throughout the first act. I mean, the whole first act is just exposition thrown at you, thrown at you, thrown at you. And this movie does have a lot to introduce, so I get it. I took issue with the way exposition was handled, particularly because I didn't read the book, but just watching the trailers, I got most of that exposition already in the 5-minute trailers, and then had to sit through 20 minutes of reiterating that same exposition that we already knew from watching the trailers. So I thought that the exposition was just, you know, too long, too clunky, told us more than we needed to know at times. So yeah, the exposition wasn't handled super well, in my opinion. There were things within this category that I liked, though. I thought the pace was fairly well handled. It was bogged down in the first act because of all that exposition, but once we blow past that, the pace moves along pretty quickly and feels pretty organic, and, you know, you move along from point A to point B without that, you know, that clunkiness that the first act had. So aside from the exposition, I thought that the pacing of the movie was pretty solid overall, and I also like that you have very strong outer goals driving the plot. You know, obviously the whole point of the movie is this competition, and then you have a lot of mini goals within that competition of, you know, getting the 3 keys and solving the riddles and all of that good stuff, and then throw in the stuff that's happening in the real world. You know, there's a lot going on within the outer goals, and all the characters are working together with the same basic outer goal of wanting to win this competition. So I thought that the outer goals, not just with the main character of Percival, but with all the characters throughout, were handled pretty well, particularly because they all have slightly different reasonings for wanting to win the competition, but they all work together with that same outer goal, and I thought that worked pretty well within the script. So I gave the plot and genre category overall a 5.2, which pretty much, it met my expectations, pretty standard. So the next category in the grid is going to be writing characters. And this was one of the weaker categories in the movie overall for me. I felt like the inner needs of the characters weren't really fleshed out very well. They definitely, like I was saying in the last category, everybody has a very strong outer goal of wanting to win this competition, and everybody has slightly different reasons for wanting to win the competition, but I didn't really feel like the emotional needs or the emotional journeys behind those goals were explored very well. But with Percival, we know that, he's one of the few that is still trying to win this competition after, 5 years. But we really never learn why he has that goal or why he's one of the few that has persisted with that goal. So I would have liked to see a little bit more of that. And even the, his character story with, living with his aunt and then them dying because of his goals. We don't really see any kind of emotional fallout from that. Not to mention the fact that that's pretty much a plot point ripped straight out of Star Wars. So, just overall, I would have liked to see more of an emotional journey. And even with Samantha, who has, a little bit more of an emotional attachment, her father was defeated, so to speak, by the big bads, and so she wants to make sure that they don't get control of the Oasis. She has, that's a very clear reason for her wanting to win the competition, but we still don't really see the inner need behind it. What will, aside from preventing these people from getting the Oasis, which is an outer goal, not an inner need, what emotional journey is that going to take her through? What will it get her? How will it make her grow or not grow? There's no emotion behind any of the things any of these people are doing. And to be fair, that is typical of the genre. More action movies typically don't have a lot of emotion, but that doesn't necessarily excuse it either. I still want to be able to have an emotional connection to characters when I see a movie, even if I'm there mostly for the action. So that was one of the biggest flaws in the movie overall for me, was just that the lack of emotion and the lack of character arcs in general. We really don't see any kind of growth, even with Wade, who essentially becomes, the savior of the Oasis and goes through this huge epic journey of, winning this competition. There's really no arc to it, no reason why he was more worthy than anyone else. There was just no emotion overall, and that's just a pretty big flaw, in my opinion, for any movie, regardless of genre. If there's no emotional connection, no emotional journey, no character arc, it's just people doing stuff for no reason, and who cares? So I did think the characters were fairly likable overall, but they were still just a little bit on the bland side. Nothing really stood out as super spectacular about any of these characters. So that was a little bit disappointing as well, but they weren't unlikable, so they were, it was about what you would expect for this kind of movie. So I gave the character section overall a 4.0, which falls below expectations. It just really didn't do anything great within this category, and there was just so many missed opportunities to really make these characters and their journeys shine from a more emotional standpoint as opposed to the physical outer goal kind of standpoint. So the next category in the grid is going to be acting and casting. And when it comes to casting, like I mentioned before, I haven't read the book, so I can't really speak to how all these characters match their literary counterparts. But as far as just the casting overall from, just a moviegoer perspective, I thought it was fine. Like I mentioned with the character section, a lot of these characters were just a little bit bland in general. And it seems like for pretty much all of the characters in this movie, you could easily swap out one actor for another and not lose anything in translation. So I didn't really think the casting was anything spectacular in that regard, but I thought everybody did a fine job. There weren't really, there was nobody cringeworthy within the acting. Nothing really to talk about one way or the other. It was all kind of just a little bland. And not to say that the actors themselves are bland. I think a lot of it just comes from the way the characters were written, that, they did the best with what they had. But it just really felt, like I said, you can swap out pretty much any actor for someone else and wouldn't lose a whole lot. So yeah, for acting and casting overall, I gave the category a 4.3 out of 10. It was fine, but there's definitely room for improvement there, particularly within the casting more so than the acting. The acting was pretty much fine given what they had, but the casting could have been a little bit more inspired. So next category is going to be lighting, and this is going to be similar to acting and casting. This is a category I just don't have really much, if anything, to say about it, unfortunately, just because it was all just straight down the line, pretty standard, exactly what you would expect for a big budget Hollywood movie. I really can't think of a single scene or even a single shot that was particularly well done, or that I can go back and say remember this scene, wasn't that great? There's just nothing, and on the flip side of that, there's also nothing that I'm like, ooh, remember that didn't look very good. There's just, everything was fine. Everything did what it set out to do and did it well, but didn't exceed expectations by any means. And I do wish that the lighting had done a little bit better of a job throughout the movie when it comes to particularly setting the mood. It was just a little, nothing looked bad. It was, it was fine, but nothing went out of its way to set a tone or a mood for the movie. And similarly, the lighting really didn't play a part at all when it comes to storytelling. And it didn't, the lighting didn't detract from the storytelling or the mood or the tone that was present from the script. It just didn't enhance it in any ways either. So in that regard, really didn't quite meet my expectations, at least for what lighting should do in a movie. But everything looked fine. Nothing was bad. So I gave the lighting category overall a 4.6 out of 10, which meets expectations, but, it's a little bit on the lower side of that, mostly because, like I said, with the mood and the storytelling, the lighting could have played a bigger part in those aspects. The next category is going to be camera work. I thought the camera work was pretty good, particularly when it comes to the more action scenes. I thought that the camera movement in particular was handled very well. Similar to lighting, I wish that, things like camera angles and mise-en-scène had been used a little bit more effectively to contribute to the storytelling. Everything was pretty standard, but overall I thought it was well done. Everything looked nice and it, did its job in that regard. But like I said, nothing really contributed to the storytelling. No camera angles really played with perspective at all, or, got into characters' heads through, extreme close-ups, nothing like that. So there was a little bit lacking in that regard, but everything looked nice, and particularly the movement was handled very effectively. So I gave the camera work overall a 5.3 out of 10, which, meets my expectations particularly for a big budget action-adventure movie. So the next category in the grid is going to be editing and special effects. Now, when it comes to just the editing overall, I thought everything was fine, but there's not really too much to talk about there. But as far as the special effects go, it's definitely the strongest point of this movie overall. Everything just looked fantastic, and the CGI, particularly in the action scenes, like I was saying with the camera work, the car race at the beginning of the movie, it was fantastic, and the big battle at the end, it's great. It really was handled well. I think my only complaint within the special effects is more of a the style as opposed to the quality, and that's going to be with the character of Artemis. I'm just so tired of seeing the giant-eyed Bratz doll kind of looking character design, and particularly on an adult female. You see it a lot in Rapunzel, for example, but this is such an extreme example, and on an adult woman it just seems infantilizing and weird, and I don't like it. And that's largely a personal preference, but it was something, even with the trailers, I was like, that's gonna bother me, and it did. So that's just, more of a, like I said, an issue I had with style rather than the quality, because everything looked great. I just wish that character design had been just a little bit different and a little bit more unique, because we've seen that design so often. And she was basically like Rapunzel meets a Navi from Avatar. It was, just that same kind of character design we've seen over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. So that's my rant on that. But overall, editing was the strongest category overall throughout the grid for Ready Player One, and I gave it a 6.8, which does exceed expectations. It was a very well edited movie with very strong CGI throughout, so that is definitely a pro within this movie. So the next category in the grid is going to be the sound design. I thought overall, things like the sound effects and the sound mix and all that was handled fairly well. Nothing really, went above and beyond and really stood out. But, overall it was pretty solid. The biggest thing of note with this movie is going to be the soundtrack, which I thought was going to be pretty epic and awesome, but it's pretty much, if you've seen the trailer, you know exactly what you're going to get into with the soundtrack, and it was just a lot of, playing the first 15 seconds of a song and then fading it out and moving on to something else. So it, it kind of lost some of the magic there, and it really focused more on nostalgia than on contributing to the story at all. Because a lot of these songs, they had nothing to do with anything that was going on. It was just, you get a little snippet here, a little snippet there, and, it's kind of fun, but really didn't help with the story at all, other than maybe setting the mood a little bit. So it definitely, it was going after kind of a Guardians of the Galaxy kind of soundtrack, and it works really well in Guardians of the Galaxy because there's an emotional connection. It's this, mixtape his mom made him, and, it contributes to the story in significant ways. I was wanting that really epic soundtrack, and it just kind of, But overall, for the sound design, I gave the category a 5.3 out of 10, which meets my expectations, but this was really a category. I guess this is an odd way to phrase it, but I was expecting it to exceed my expectations, which I guess means that this actually fell below my expectations, but, semantics. But, I really thought that the soundtrack was going to just blow me away and be really awesome and fun and just, one of those just fun, and it just, it was fine. So the next category in the grid is going to be aesthetics. So I kind of consider this to be character aesthetics, which is going to be hair, makeup, and costumes, and environmental aesthetics, which is sets, props, and locations. As far as the character aesthetics go, I thought everything was fine. Nothing really blew me away. I would kind of expect, particularly things like costumes, to be a little bit more interesting, visually speaking. And, everything was pretty standard, which I think was intended in a lot of ways. You have the normal reality, real world kind of stuff with the fantastical oasis scenes. So I get that there was that contrast there, but it just was, I don't know, a little too, not necessarily bland, because again, I think it was kind of supposed to be, but just visually uninteresting and boring. So I was a little bit disappointed with the, with the costume design in that regard. But everything looked fine. And same thing goes for makeup. My only real complaint with the makeup was that Samantha's birthmark really wasn't very noticeable a lot of the time. The first time you see her with it, it's fairly noticeable, and then it seems like with each passing scene it almost starts to fade a little bit. And considering that seemed to be such an important characteristic for this character, that she was, uncomfortable and awkward and self-conscious in the real world, but extremely powerful and confident in the oasis, and she has the self-conscious because of the birthmark, and that really didn't come through very well, mostly because you barely even notice the birthmark through most of the movie. So yeah, and especially at the very end during the final battle when she gives her avatar the birthmark, that could have been a really powerful moment if they had played up the birthmark in the real world a little bit more. There was something there, and I'm sure in the book it comes across much better. But that was, something that I think could have easily been enhanced at least. I mean, obviously some of that is in the script, because it just wasn't even really talked about aside from in the, the first time we meet her. But I think if the, if the makeup department had just, made it bold and made it consistent throughout the whole movie, it would have been a much stronger and much bolder character choice, and would have helped define that character a lot better. As far as the environmental aesthetics go, I thought everything looked really great within the, particularly within the sets and locations. Obviously a lot of it was, computer generated, but it just looked fantastic. And, the slums where he lives looked amazing. Like, just all of the, sets and locations just looked phenomenal, whether it was, actually physically there or CGI. It just, the visuals there looked really great. And then, of course, the props, a lot of which are, visual references to, 80s and 90s pop culture. A lot of that worked really well within the movie. So for the aesthetics category overall, I gave it a 6.1 out of 10, which just barely crosses the threshold into exceeding expectations by my standards. So the next category in the grid is going to be impact on film. And this one I divide up into 3 separate subcategories. So we have critical impact, cult or audience impact, and historical or inspirational impact. And for critical impact, I really just, particularly for a movie this new, I just looked to the Metacritic score, which for this movie, as of the recording of this review, was a 63. So I just divided that by 10, called it a 6.3. For the audience rating, I just kind of looked around at a couple different websites and kind of averaged out the scores. So I looked at the Cinema score, which was an A-, the IMDb score, and the Rotten Tomatoes score for the audience scores, and kind of converted them and averaged them out together, and I gave it a 7.25 out of 10 based on those scores. For historical and inspirational impact, I only gave this one a 2 out of 10, mostly just because, it does have a lot of these references to 80s and 90s, which is very fun, but it doesn't really do much to be its own entity, and I just don't see it. Aside from the amazing special effects, I don't really see it being super inspirational, and certainly there's really no, again, aside from the references that are referencing film history in that specific time period, there's really no historical significance, I don't think, that's going to be present with this movie. It's really just a fun homage more than something that's going to stand the test of time itself, I think. So I only gave it 2 out of 10 for that subcategory. So for impact on film, those 3 subcategories are going to average out to a 5.18 out of 10. So the next category in the grid is going to be overall enjoyment. And I gave Ready Player One a 6 out of 10. It didn't quite exceed my expectations, but was on the higher end of my expectations. So it didn't blow me away. It's not one, I'm probably not going to buy it when it comes out for home release, not going to watch it again and again, etc., etc. But it was fun and enjoyable. I'm glad I saw it. It was really, it was a fun experience for the references more than for a story in its own right. But that said, I thought it did a fairly good job of, having these characters and having a new story, a new type of adventure that they go on, even though it is very much so recycling, the movies that it's referencing. Like I said earlier, there's the plot point where his aunt dies, which is a moment that is very much so, ripped out of Star Wars. It's not just the homages, it's the plot points themselves. And even at the end, when Percival, proves he's worthy to, be the heir to the Oasis, very similar to, Willy Wonka, which I know isn't, it's not an 80s movie, but still, it's not just the homages, it's borrowing everything from all of these older movies, which is fun and entertaining, but not something that I would go back to over and over and over again. I did give Ready Player One 2 points of extra credit as well. So the first is going to be just for all the references. I kind of lost some points within the writing, plot, and genre category, just because it, like I was just saying with the overall enjoyment, it, borrows so much from all these older movies without producing much that is new, but it's still fun, so I wanted to throw in a little bit of extra credit for all of the references and homages, because it is fun. Even though it doesn't make this the most original movie in the world, it's fun. And then the second point of extra credit I gave it was just for the audience interactions, I guess, throughout the movie. Normally, with most movies it would be a little bit annoying, but this was just kind of, it was just fun. When certain people throughout the audience would see a reference that they'd like, they would, just get excited. Not obnoxiously so, but there's just a general excitement in the air, I guess, which is just not an experience you get often unless it's like a, midnight showing of Rocky Horror Picture Show or The Room or, something interactive like that. You really don't get a lot of audience reactions these days. And so it was just kind of, it was fun, and it was just the right level, at least in the theater that I was in, where it wasn't obnoxious, but it was fun. So the total score that I gave Ready Player One is going to be a 53.78, which pretty much just, meets expectations. So I consider with my scoring anything between a 40.01 and a 60 falls within that meets expectations category. So So a 50 would be right in the middle. So 53.78, pretty close to right down the middle. It definitely met my expectations overall, which isn't a bad thing. It doesn't mean it's a bad movie. It's just not one that's gonna stick with me for a long time. And like I said before, not one I'm gonna watch over and over and over again. But as far as recommendations go, if you like action-adventure movies, this is one to see. If you like, 80s and 90s movies, and I think even more so 80s and 90s video games, this is one to see. So it's fun, it's an homage, it's got a lot of action and a lot of very well done action. So if you like those kind of things, if it appeals to you at all, pretty much if the trailer appeals to you at all, I'd say go see it. It's fun, it's just not the best movie ever, but there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with just being fun and being an experience rather than a movie that's gonna stick with you forever and ever. So that's my take on Ready Player One. I'm glad I saw it. It was fun. Probably not gonna buy it when it comes out for home release. So that's it for this review. I will be posting a review of the new Tommy Wiseau, Greg Sestero movie, Best Friends, later this week. I'm looking forward to that. I think it's going to be awesome, so be sure to check that out once I post it. And then next week on Wednesday, I will be back with a throwback review of The Wizard of Oz. Hey, thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe to Griddy Films on YouTube by pressing this button. Also, like and share this video. You can follow Griddy Films on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for new video announcements, entertainment news, fun pics, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.